I've been eyeing this pattern for a really long time. I saw it on Pinterest a few years ago, and it's been pinned on my board for a while. So I thought I would make this and make a Christmas version of this quilt with William Morris fabric. My choices that I chose are this bird fabric, and I'm gonna fussy cut that for my centers. I chose this green one for my cornerstones. And then I did a background Tilda linen type looking fabric. Not sure what color that is, but I liked how soft it was. I'm going to do this red with light green accent, which is also William Morris fabric for one of my pieces. And then my other one is more of a tonal print, and it's this red bird fabric. I guess it's got bunnies on it as well, but I'm going to use that for probably my bigger surround print. So I did pre-cut most of my pieces, and I'm going to assemble these and hopefully convert a couple people into liking William Morris fabric, because I think there's a lot of people that steer away from it, either because they don't think it'll match anything or they don't like it, but I don't know. I really like William Morris fabric, so I'm going to make a quilt out of it. So I'm going to make some of my blocks, and then I will show you a few of the things as I go. I'm going to be making the Flying Geese method where you make 4 at a time with this. So I am not one who likes to pin. So the pattern does recommend that you draw a line diagonal to diagonal and then sew 1/4 of an inch on each side. But I'm going to cut it and then I'm going to sew it just to save myself a step, because I don't really want to have to pin it and then mark it. I just feel like that's a waste of my time. And hopefully I will have nice straight pieces when I'm done, and it'll be a little bit quicker because I'm saving myself a step or two. So I am going to do that right now. I will say, when you do this, you want to make sure that your line that you're cutting and or marking goes through this point. Theoretically, there's a point under here that it needs to go through, and then this point as well. So make sure everything is nice and lined up, and you can make sure that this piece is lined up by taking your ruler and having it lined up with this spot in the end, and then you can fudge your block one way or the other to try to make it fit so that it goes directly through that point. So that looks really good to me, actually. I'm going to stack my next one on top of it and then do the same thing. I'm going to check and make sure that it lines up. So this one, the point actually comes a little bit over on this side. So I'm going to hold that bottom piece and rotate my block a little bit, that green block, so that it better lines up. So I like the way that looks. I'm going to take my ruler, slice all the way down the middle, make sure I really got it, and then I can just move that aside, move this aside, and then sew through it, and then go on to my next step. There are no pressing instructions for this in my pattern that I see just glancing through. I was always taught to iron towards the sky. So when I do this, I'm going to iron towards my green pieces. And it does look a little funky right now because that's what your block looks like. But you're going to add another square here. So let me see if I can find a square. That one's too small. Okay, I think this is the right size square. Okay, so I'm gonna do this. I'm going to add my next square here. Again, I don't like to mark. I like to just cut and sew and make sure everything's held nicely while I sew. I'm going to cut straight through the middle, making sure, again, that your pieces are lined up so that all of your points all go in a straight line. I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna cut it, and then I'm gonna sew 1/4 of an inch on each side, and then from each of these units, I'm gonna end up with 2 Flying Geese blocks. We're gonna press it flat, and then you can either do both of these at the same time, or you can do one at a time like that. Just make sure everything is flat and not warpy. So there's one block. Do the same for the next one. Press it flat. And then press it open. I will add my next couple of pieces to this. Cut it, sew it, and then we're going to be pressing again. If you're worried that these pieces are not going to be lined up straight, you can add your background block onto this, flip it over, and then you can see how where that meets that doesn't look like a square. So I'm sure that this is going to have to be moved over so that that little piece right there is in the shape more of a square. So I'm going to realign this up, holding at that bottom point, trying to align the edges, and then that should look like a square, not a rectangle. So then I'll take my straight edge. I will line my straight edge up with my bottom point. It needs to line up with my top point on my background piece, and then ideally it should go through where these 2 background triangle points meet in that center as well. So once that looks good, you can cut, and I make sure that it goes all the way through that seam up here because that gets a little bulky. And you'll end up with 2 pieces that look like that. You'll sew through, and then you should have Flying Geese out of that. So you can see where my sewing line is. I like to sew just like a needle width closer or less than 1/4 of an inch so that it's a scant 1/4 of an inch. I'm gonna cut these apart so maybe it'll be a little bit easier to see. There's overlap. I have a little dog ear right here, but you can tell my 1/4 inch was good and everything was lined up nicely because my seam hits right in the middle of those. So I'll be able to press it out, and that is what my Flying Geese will look like. From the back, that's what it looks like as well. You can see that it hits nicely through that junction right there. So I'm gonna press these open. I'll do this next one in a second, but I will show you. I'm gonna press it flat and then press towards my sky, which is my background piece. And there you have a Flying Geese. My next step in the pattern is to make a couple of half square triangles. It's wanting me to pair up my background with my main print, and then also my background with another red print is what I chose. So then this is, I guess, my A print and my B print. So I'm going to be making 2 half square triangles out of each of these squares. So I am going to cut down the middle, sew 1/4 of an inch on each side. It recommends that you draw a line, sew on each side, and then cut. I have all of my half square triangles sewn together. I did chain piece them. My next step is going to be to cut all of these apart, and it is telling me to press towards my A and my B fabric, so that's going to be my red fabrics on these. I am going to then make quarter square triangles out of these. So I will have to cut these apart, so these are going to be a little bit smaller than what they are right now. So I'm going to press these open, and then I will show you my next step. I'm now going to make some quarter square triangles using my A fabric in background and then my B fabric in background piece. In order to make half square triangles, it's important that you do have your fabric pressed to one side or the other. I don't like to press my fabric open, and I find that it's easier to do this so that I can nest my seams. So on this one, the bulk of my fabric is pressed towards my focal fabric on this side, and then the bulk of my fabric is pressed towards the focal fabric on this side. When I put these together and you kind of slide them together and you pinch, it creates a stop between the two fabric and you can't slide it anymore. That's how you know that they're locked in. I'm going to do that for both of these because I made 2 sets of half square triangles. I'm going to make sure everything is nice and locked in and flat. And then I'm going to cut on these diagonals. So not the one that I sewed through, but the opposite is what I'm going to cut through. Cut through the middle, sew 1/4 inch on each side, and then you'll end up with 4 quarter square triangles because we're doing this to this other set as well. Here is a better close-up look how they're opposite, and I can make them slide together. So you just kind of do that, and if you press, they don't go past each other any further because the bulk on each side helps stop them. I have my chain piece of quarter square triangles. I just go through before I chop them all apart and iron them. I check and make sure all of my points, my junction points, look good, and all of these I have already checked, so they do look good. I'm going to take these, and then I am going to not press them to one side. Get the iron back hot. But I'm going to press them around either clockwise or counterclockwise, depending on how I had previously pressed them. So this one, it looks like I'm going to be doing it clockwise. I'm going to twirl my seams in the middle because I have 4 seams coming all the way together, and I will show you how to do that. I'm going to take my piece. This is the one that I just sewed on. I'm going to pinch on either side of that vertical seam, and then I'm just going to pinch and stretch it out a little bit to separate it. What that does is that breaks apart that vertical seam, so it's not breaking apart your horizontal seam that you just sewed to lock that vertical seam in, but it does that, and then it breaks it apart so that you can press it open, and it creates a little forepatch. I'm going to flatten this out. So I pinched apart. If there's a couple of from that vertical seam still attached together, you can take a pin or a small pair of scissors and then just clip those. So this one's coming apart pretty easy. My seams that I had previously pressed are going this way and this way. So I'm going to keep in that clockwise motion, and that's how I'm going to press my blocks. So I'll just reinforce the one that I already did, and then just start pressing all the way around. And then I'm also going to press that middle 4 square looking block down as well so that it's nice and flat. And this just makes for a very nice flat finish, and so you don't have like 8 pieces of fabric or 8 layers of fabric bunched up all on one side when you're trying to sew through something like quilting it, or if you do it by yourself, it'll just ensure it's just a couple layers. So the most you're going to sew through would be 4. So 1, 2 the red, 3 the green, 4 this green piece. So I'm going to do that to every single one of my 4 square blocks. I guess quarter square triangle is technically what they're called. So I'm going to do that to all my quarter square triangle blocks and just make sure they're all nice and pressed out flat. The next block type I'm going to make is a snowball block. For snowball blocks, this one is a little bit different because you're going to have a little bit of waste on this. Instead of drawing a line in the middle and cutting in the middle, you're going to sew in the middle and then cut or draw a line 1/4 inch of the way to the extra fabric, which is on this side. So I'm going to be able to sew this on the diagonal so that then it ends up looking like this. and then you'll have a small piece on this edge that you can use for something else. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to actually take my ruler. I'm going to cut 1/4 inch off on my waist side, and then use it as my 1/4 inch guide and sew 1/4 inch so that it hits this point and this point right here. This is what the block looks like when you trim 1/4 inch over. So from here to here, that should be 1/4 inch, and that's what it should look like. And you're going to sew diagonal to diagonal. You can use this edge as your guide now for your 1/4 inch while you're sewing. I have all my snowballed pieces made. The pattern recommends to press open, but these points where my fabrics meet don't meet up with anything else in the quilt, so I'm just going to press out towards my snowballed pieces. So I'm going to lay these flat, press it flat, and then just go towards each side, and that's what my block is going to look like. I have not used this sewing method before, but the next method in the pattern is to create a bunch of half square triangles using a bigger block. It says that I'm going to be able to make 4 half square triangles from this combination of fabric. It's wanting me to sew all the way around the edges, and I'm going to cut on each of the diagonals, and it is going to make 4 half square triangles. I don't really like this method, I can tell you already right now, because it's going to cause all of my outside edges on my half square triangles to be cut on the bias. I guess this is a way that you could maybe save fabric potentially doing it this way. But when I assemble all my pieces, I'm just gonna have to be really careful because those edges are just gonna be a little bit stretchier than normal using this method. So I'm gonna sew all the way around, and then I will show you while I'm cutting it. Here is my sewn together block. You can see all the way around I have sewed. Next, I'm going to take my ruler and then line it up on my diagonals, and then cut. I'm going to, I wish I had a rotating mat right now, but I'm just going to take these pieces and take them this way and line them back up so that I can use both points as my guide. So that, once again, I'm going to go from corner to corner and then cut. This is then what you're going to end up with. I'll show you right now how stretchy these edges are. Seems like a nice quick way to do this, but you're just going to have to be extra careful if you use this method ever for half square triangles because of those stretchy edges. Even on this fabric, you can see how stretchy it is. Whereas if I use my normal, it's not as, if this would have normally been my outside edge on these, this isn't as stretchy as these edges are. I'm going to press all of these towards my focal fabric just because it's a little bit darker. The next step for me is to attach all of my made pieces plus any extra pieces I have according to what the pattern requires. I'm going to put all these together like my pattern is telling me to, and I will show you the finished block. You might run into a case where you're trying to put pieces together, and since I do press one way or the other, I don't press open. Like this piece right here would fit together, nest together well, but this side wouldn't because they're both pressed the same way. I would just pick one of these. So on this one, I would pick my half square triangle and then just finger press it the other way so that I can lock in my seams. And then once I do that, you can just kind of clip with your scissors like this part right in here and just press one way, press the other way so that everything is nice and flat. So I'm going to put all these together into units and I will show you my finished product from all of this. Unfortunately for me, and not for you though, I ended up miscutting a couple of my pieces and not realizing it until I started to put together a couple of my blocks in this quilt. I was using a left-handed ruler instead of the right-handed ruler I normally use that Creative Grids has, and so I miscounted, and some of them were just about the right size, but enough to where I'm having to adjust and recut some of my pieces. So all of my triangles, all of my Flying Geese blocks, I'm having to trim down to accommodate for the lack of fabric in some of my other block pieces, which is not too hard. I mean, all you're going to do is you want to make sure you still have 1/4 of an inch between the top of your point and the outside edge, just so you don't chop off your point. And then you can cut off along the bottom and the sides accordingly, so that when you make your Flying Geese block, your diagonal still ends in the corners. I could cut these down significantly if I needed to, but I'm going to adjust all of those blocks and then reattach them to my 1/4 square triangle blocks, just so that they attach to all the rest of my pieces the way that they're supposed to. I also did miscut one of my pieces, this one, when I was trying to attach my snowball. I did accidentally, I was just going too fast, and I cut off on the diagonal and not 1/4 of an inch over so that I could sew on the diagonal. So I ended up having to cut another piece of this and another green square so that my block would be the right size. But that stuff happens. That's why you buy a little bit of extra fabric. And it's no big deal. You just keep going the way you gotta go. But I would say, like with this one, since I don't normally cut with this ruler and I was at least 1/4 of an inch off on every single one of my pieces, for this one, it's not going to go into a quilt. I'm just going to recut. If I do decide to make a whole quilt out of this, I'm going to decide to recut and cut with my regular ruler that I cut with, and not this left-handed ruler where all the measurements are backwards, so that all my pieces do fit together perfectly, and then I don't have to now determine what size they are and then redesign the whole pattern, I guess, based on all of my miscuts, because they are off by a little bit. I would just recut the whole thing. So I'm going to finish this up and then I will have a finished block to show you. I'm going to show you the difference too between a nice trimmed down block, which I would recommend on all of these. I would also recommend, if you make half square triangles, to trim them all down too, just so that they're square and there's no sort of concave or convex edges on any of those. So this is my trimmed square and this is my untrimmed square. You see all my dog ears on there. Here, I'll show you the size difference too, because I did trim these down a bit, but it just makes the block so they're not warpy. You can see how some of the edges kind of touch, but some of them are warpy when you sew. You'll have a much nicer finished product if you do get in the habit of trimming down all of your blocks. Even if it is just a tiny bit that you shave off the edge, that makes a big difference in the end. Here is my finished block. I think it turned out pretty nice. There's not a lot of contrast though between my reds, and I think I might try to look for something different. I mean, it's not bad looking by any means, but sometimes I do look a little bit more contrast. If I do remake this, I will definitely cut my pieces to the correct size, because I had an issue with that. I would also try to either center one of the birds a little bit better on this, because I did have to recut this piece, or I would center both of the birds. I'm not sure. It might chop off part of their heads though, so I wouldn't want that to happen. But this is the end product. It's a really nice large block, so I'm sure that making a quilt out of this would go pretty quickly. You could easily do like a 3x3 and that would be decent size. But here it is.